Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again with Matt Kelly for another episode of the award-winning Compliance into the Weeds. Welcome back, Matt.
Hey, Tom, how are you?
Matt, Boeing continues to be in the news for lots of different reasons, and we're going to explore a couple of those today. I'm going to start with a blog post you released, I believe, today. We're recording this on Monday, June 23, where they talked about some of the upgrades to their compliance program. You want to take it from there?
Yeah, sure. So this is something Boeing published a couple of weeks ago now, their annual Aerospace Safety Report. Apparently, Boeing has been publishing this report, which was unknown to me until just a couple of weeks ago, but this is now their fourth or fifth year running. They began publishing it in 2022, where they talk about improvements that they are making to their safety and speak up culture. Obviously, this all tracks back to the two MAX 737 air crash disasters in the late 2010s. That led to the big deferred prosecution agreement in 2021, where Boeing paid, I think it was $2.5 billion in fines and had all sorts of strict oversight as a result of those two crashes. Then it started publishing this aerospace safety report at the spring of 2022, looking back on things they had done over 2021 to improve the culture. And they've been putting that out ever since. This year, in 2025, they're looking back at 2024, and they spent most of their time talking in this report about how they improved their speak up culture, their practices for quality training and whatnot, and how they are working with their partners. And Boeing has a large, sprawling, complicated global supply chain. So Boeing has an awful lot of partners where the need for safety and quality control awareness is quite high. So you could look at that report in quite a number of ways, but I zeroed in on what Boeing was trying to do for the speak up culture, which is really material that any ethics and compliance officer is going to have to grapple with. And there are a couple of good points to consider when you look at what Boeing had been doing in 2024 to try and goose up its culture, goose up the rate of internal reporting and the sort of training that it was rolling out to employees and managers. So it's a good report worth reading.
So let's start with the speak up part of it because I was intrigued by two procedural steps. One was the anonymous reporting, or the reporting that would be routed to a third party, number one. And number two, the information employees would receive back in terms of the status of the report and how it would move forward, if any, if at all. So what's the significance of bringing in a third party, and why is that such a dramatic difference from what Boeing had in place previously?
It's interesting. I'll go through some of the numbers in that Boeing put in its report, and most notably, the number of internal reports it received in 2024 shot up by 220%. Now, we don't know what the absolute number is. Did it go from like 10 to 22, or did it go from 10,000 to 22,000? We have no idea, but it went up in by 220%. This is my pure speculation here, but I cannot help but wonder if perhaps Boeing's more recent air disaster, where remember they had that 2021 DPA that was going to expire at the beginning of 2024, just before it expired, Boeing had that door blow out on an Alaska Air flight, mid-flight, and so that was days before this DPA was going to expire. Justice Department said, no, Boeing, therefore your DPA is in breach, and we're going back to the drawing board. I kind of wonder if that incident at the beginning of 2024 goosed everybody's awareness that, yeah, safety is still a big mess at our company. And then they started to take it much more seriously. That is purely speculation, but I'm hard-pressed to believe that door blowout would not have focused the mind even more at Boeing on the importance of getting more internal reports about quality issues. So here's what Boeing did. Number one, they changed some of the protocols for who investigates a report. An employee submits a report on its speak up line. Apparently, that is what Boeing calls it, the speak up line. I don't know who runs the speak up line for Boeing, which vendor, if any, or is it handled internally or whatnot. But when an employee submits the report it is routed to some other person who is not that employee's manager. They only say it goes for an independent, objective third party who would investigate the report. I don't know if that means somebody who is not an employee of Boeing or just somebody who is not the supervisor of the internal reporting employee, but it does go to somebody else. And that is meant to increase the confidentiality that the reporter should feel. The second thing that Boeing did, they did two, was they tried to address the need for more transparency into the internal reporting process. So every employee who submits a report now gets real-time updates on the status of those reports. They also get access to a private dashboard where they can review and track their reports. And then all employees also have access to this broader array of internal reporting data. So everybody can see what's the total volume of reports, what's the outcome of these reports, how many were substantiated or not, or led to disciplinary action. I don't know exactly what level of detail they get into specific reports, but in the aggregate, all employees can see, okay, here's the internal reporting activity and how it's getting addressed. So I really like those two steps for two reasons. They really hit on the fundamental ingredients of success for an internal reporting system. Number one, employees need to feel safe using the system. And then number two, they need to feel heard, that when they bring something to management's attention, they are confident management is actually going to do something. And we have talked about this ad nauseum on this podcast, on your materials, on my blog, everywhere else, that it's so often it's about fear of retaliation or cynical belief that nothing's going to get done. That's why people don't report. Boeing is trying to tackle both of those things by making the speak up process more confidential, more secure, and you get to see real hard evidence of what actually happens with these reports and how is Boeing handling them, and are they handling them well or not. And it fosters a sense of trust in the system, and that's good. Can't say I love that it took Boeing so much to get to this point where they're only introducing these steps now. Boeing is not a small company. Boeing is not lightly regulated. Boeing has not had no brushes with misconduct before. You would have thought or hoped that Boeing would have already done these steps, but okay, whatever. They're doing them now. They're good. And if you think about why they're doing them, there's some instructive lessons there for everybody else about how you should try to cultivate a strong internal reporting culture. At long last, Boeing is moving in the right direction now. Okay.
So let's turn to the second area that you discussed in your blog post, and that was what I'm going to call the ambassador program. And this seemed to be a scale of ambassador programs perhaps we haven't seen in the past. Although Boeing, I think, as you noted, has over 150,000 employees, so perhaps it's not. But to bring online this size scale of ambassador program really is a massive effort, no matter what the size of the company. What did you see there?
Yeah, that was the other thing that Boeing talked about quite a bit in this aerospace safety report was the training that it's done. So yes, it rolled out 160,000 people got role-based training on safety and how to identify safety risks and how they're supposed to elevate those risks to somebody who can address them. That's good. But more interesting to me was that Boeing had doubled the size of they call it the Safety Champions Program, but my understanding of this is that it's really like a compliance ambassador program. And we've also talked about that in compliance land for years and years. But they doubled that in 2024 to more than 1,000 people. There are 178,000 employees at Boeing as of its last annual report at the end of 2024. So I was actually kind of intrigued, Tom. It made me wonder, what is the right population density for an ambassador program? And I don't know that there is a hard answer for that, but if you have about 1,000 compliance ambassadors for 178,000 people, that means one ambassador per 178 employees. To me, that sounds pretty high. I'm not opposed to it. I'm just saying it seems high to me. But if you do the math, if they more than doubled to 1,000 employees in 2024, that implies that they had 500 or so in 2023, and they had slightly fewer employees in 2023, but the ratio of ambassadors to total employees back then was one for 342 employees. Now it's one per 178 employees. Like I said before, I don't know what the density is. What is the correct number there? Probably a question worth a compliance officer contemplating. I guess it would depend on the severity of the risks that you're worried about. Boeing is clearly worried about safety and quality. Boeing clearly does not have a great track record at handling safety and quality. It needs to do better at that, period. But what is your past track record with this risk? What are your resources to train that cadre of ambassadors or champions or whatever you want to call them? And try and get your head around what are the biggest risks? Who would these people be, anyways? Are they going to be dedicated ethics and compliance people? Are they going to be more like friends of the cause who work in other business functions? I assume the default would be that. But, it kind of makes you think about that. One last point about the ambassador program here, the champions program. Boeing does spend a lot of time training these champions on how to be champions. They go through a 5-week course. I think it's online mostly, but it takes 5 weeks to be instructed on how to be a safety champion. And then they also give them like an alumni group and quarterly meetups and other ways to keep them involved and make those champions feel engaged in the evolving state of the safety and quality program. I think that's another great idea. Other compliance officers could steal is ongoing alumni meetings of your compliance ambassador program so they don't feel alone when you train them and then set them loose in the Indonesia Bureau or the APAC or Africa region or something like that. They still have a connection to the company and the ethics issues. It's a good idea. Again, Boeing is making the right steps now. Would have been nice if they made them earlier, but I'll take victory where it is, and they're doing it now. Good for them.
Matt, there was another part of your blog post, and it really, I, although you put it under training, it was so significant to me. I want to carve it out and speak to it specifically. And that is after you talked about the ambassador program, you began a discussion about training for managers and the specific training that managers would receive, starting with role-based training, but offering managers a training to as a discussion guide to facilitate team sessions about ways to apply the learning and to encourage communication about safety and focus on ongoing improvements. And then here's the line that I had the question on. Managers need to know, quote, managers need to know how to foster, end quote. So I want to start with a question because it was unclear to me what they are to foster. Are they to foster listen? Are they to foster discussion? Are they to foster a greater safety? And then that's going to lead to a series of questions about, are we now asking, or is Boeing asking managers to take on a role that perhaps they're not suited for, but one they at least have not done in the past? Maybe explore that a little bit.
Sure. And I did think that it was a good point that Boeing raised. I'm glad they included it in this report. So, yes, they provide 160,000 employees in total, all get role-based training. Great. Then come within that group, there is a smaller group of managers who are getting more specific training. And I assume some of it is how managers intersect with corporate misconduct. They're going to see it in a different way, maybe, than rank and file employees who might witness a colleague doing it. Managers might need training on how to understand an employee is giving me a report. Not always are employees clear, or maybe a manager isn't trained in how to know what to do with a report if you receive it. We've also talked about that too. But then, Tom, to your point, Boeing had one other thing that I was struck by, and that was the quote that you read off there. Managers are given a discussion guide to facilitate team sessions about way to apply the learning. Boeing provided leaders and teams the tools and training needed to foster a culture that prioritizes safety, encourages communication, focusing on ongoing improvements. Close quote. Clearly, that is like a wonderfully ChatGPT sort of, hits every keyword. I'm sure HR consultants would be beaming with pride at that hackneyed, cliched phrase. But it does get to a good point. And that is, I said, my words is that managers need to know how to foster what? A corporate culture that encourages people to think ethically and act ethically, and how to raise concerns, and how to create I guess we would call it a safe space to raise concerns about, is this thing we're doing, my colleague doing it, our team doing it, our whole company doing it, but is this thing that I see us doing, is that really the right thing to do? It can be really tough for employees to feel confident to speak up about that. And every manager should try to create a culture that encourages them to speak on these matters. That's what you need to train managers to do. Is, I just said managers should be trained to foster, period. I guess the thing that comes after the period probably would be how to foster an ethical environment, or an environment that is safe to discuss ethics, or something like that. And we overlook that point when we talk about managers, and for first-time managers in particular, or managers new to your specific company. I think they might struggle with how to understand how to do that at your company. And that is a critical thing that ethics and compliance people need to think about with manager training. It's not just about the misconduct or how to navigate the compliance policies and procedures. It's about how to be a good leader of the corporate culture within your own little team or department or fiefdom. And so, like I said, again, I'm glad Boeing has brought that up. It's a good point to raise.
I guess the way you structured those last few paragraphs of your blog post really made me consider, does this need to be it's not a new topic, but a different topic? Because it's one thing to teach a manager how to listen or how to intake a report. But at least the way you wrote it, it seemed to me they're asking managers to sort of lead this effort to change the culture within a company. And if managers haven't been trained on that, and two, they're not graded on that or evaluated on that, I just see that as a difficulty. Am I seeing this wrong, or do you just see it a different way?
I mean, I suppose I might take issue with, managers need to lead the charge. Ultimately, it's senior management who leads the charge on really anything, but especially on setting corporate culture. Maybe a better way to think about it would be that, according to the HR gurus and the deep thinkers out there, the best managers are ones who help their employees and their team members achieve their best potential. Or if, for whatever reason, they're not going to live up to their potential, ultimately, maybe perhaps guide them out of the organization or to a different role. But you're there as a manager not to do a great job. You are there to help others do their great job. And part of that in today's very complicated, very interconnected world is do your great job in a very ethically aware, high profile, heavily regulated world. That's true for Boeing. It's true for a lot of businesses. You're not going to be able to help everybody be the best they can be unless you're also creating a place where they can talk about how do we do things the right way. So every manager really is going to be responsible for that in some little way for low-level managers and some greater way for higher up managers. It's a good point about, do you grade them on their performance on this? I don't know if HR would necessarily break that out as a separate criteria, but if you are not helping your employees achieve the best they can be, like, you're not a good manager. That is the job, is to make sure that they have all the resources, the skills, the energy, the wherewithal to be able to hit the quota or the target or fulfill the mission you've been given. It's not for you to do it yourself. It's for you to make sure your team can do it. I guess I'll stop there, but being able to talk about how to do things the right way is going to be part of it.
I'd now like to shift the focus a little bit. We had a hearing last week at the Federal District Court in Dallas on the Department of Justice's desire to give Boeing a non-prosecution agreement and no corporate oversight via an independent monitor appointed by the Department of Justice. And no surprise to anyone, the families of the victims of the two 737 MAX crashes vociferously objected to this and proposed the court appoint a special prosecutor. I think that's going to be a very difficult thing for the court to do, but I guess their point to me was, we really have the court and they have zero transparency into the settlement, the now non-prosecution agreement going forward. And so I wanted to maybe get your thoughts on, because of, once again, the unique situation of this case, as we've discussed in other podcasts, where we have a very large group of vocal and organized victims under the Victim Rights Act, could the court consider some type of oversight, whether it be a special master or whatever you might want to call it? Because it seems to me, in addition, the biggest problem now for Boeing is the lack of transparency and the lack of accountability that they will present to stakeholders across the country, including the flying public.
I think there are a couple of different threads we should keep in mind.
I guess the last thing to say would be you need to run down to your trademark lawyer and get that phrase trademarked. Matt, as always, thanks so much. I can't wait to see what our next episode might bring us.
Compliance Podcast Network. Start your mornings with daily compliance news, quick, sharp updates on the top compliance and ethics stories in under 5 minutes every morning in Compliance Podcast Network. Because compliance never sleeps. Need practical advice fast? Check out Compliance Tip of the Day. One actionable idea to level up your program. Short and sweet. Every day on Compliance Podcast Network. Got 10 minutes? We've got the week's top 10 stories. 10 for 10 brings you the big compliance headlines. Fast, fun, and focused. Every Saturday on Compliance Podcast Network. And don't miss the Sunday Book Review, where compliance meets culture through must-read books and big ideas every Sunday in Compliance Podcast Network. Whether you're in the office, on a walk, or commuting, stay smart, stay ethical, stay tuned. Only on the Compliance Podcast Network. Available wherever you listen to podcasts.